What I basically want to share in this particular session is the country priorities and needs as far as Zimbabwe climate risks are concerned. And if you remember the presentation by Professor Hayla earlier, she opened the rest of the sessions that we are going to enter into with a question. And that question had to do with capacity needs and capacity gaps. And if you were listening to the Honorable Minister, she did talk about one of the questions around what sort of activities are higher education institutions going to do to fill those gaps. So I think we have been talking about how Zimbabwe as a country is experiencing increases in temperature, recurrent droughts, unpredictable rainfall patterns and so forth. And these are things that are very familiar to people in agriculture, people in the meteorological offices and so forth. And I think earlier on in the first session, we did learn about the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientific working group, which is saying that there is more than 90% certainty that humans are contributing to climate change. And of course, our continental interior location places this country at risk, which means resources, knowledge, and innovations need to be invested to respond, but also adapt and to mitigate. And of course, in terms of projected rates of warming, we've got those ranges from 0.15 to 0.55 degrees Celsius per decade, with higher temperature changes in the dry seasons. And I think as far as projections to 2050 are concerned, we're looking at 2.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. And I think as higher education institutions, the challenge is how do we communicate this to people in the streets? Because talking about 2.5 degrees Celsius does not mean anything to them. But we need to be able to translate that. What does it mean to their food production processes, for example, to their access to water? And of course, if we look at projections that are looking at, by 2080, mean annual rainfall will be between 5 to 18% less. That is quite a lot for a country or a region that is already water stressed. And we need to recognize these changes that are happening in the rainfall regimes. And the projected temperature increases and the decline in rainfall, they are going to result in so many things like decline in woodlands and grasslands. I am happy there are people from the forestry company that are here. And an expansion of semi-arid conditions as well as scrub savanna. So desertification is actually taking place. So what are we going to do as higher education institutions to respond to these issues of desertification? To be proactive, not reactive only. We've talked about those first three bullets, Prof. We can go to the fourth bullet. Just to look at the vulnerabilities and priorities, for the country. Yes, I just want to talk about the medium-term plan, which is in the previous slide that you have just, yes. So the medium-term plan for Zimbabwe, 2012 to 2015, it does recognize that climate change poses a significant challenge to socio-economic development. So it means our policymakers are really picking it up and they have placed it in the plans. Now, the challenge now for higher education institutions is, if it is in our policies, how do we translate what is in policy to education? How do we translate it so that the people out there can be able to actually have green jobs, for example? How can we have jobs that are climate compatible that also generate income for our people? And I think a lot of us are aware that we have a new climate change response strategy, which is providing a very good framework, for comprehensive bringing together of the issues that are really critical for climate compatible development. And a range of acts that have been enacted in various sectors, within the water sector, the meteorological services sector, and also civil protection. I think as educationists, as people in higher education, as people in NGOs, how do we bring fragmented issues of climate change, which are located in different policy instruments and acts together, so that there is a holistic systems approach to climate compatible development. So it is also, I think, very important for us to recognize that a number of institutional mechanisms are actually in place in Zimbabwe around climate change management, from the level of the Office of the President, national ministries and departments, and there are also intersectoral mandates that are there. For example, the Climate Change Office that exists does try to bring together issues from the different sectors to do with climate change. And there's a new ministry, Ministry of Environment, Water and Climate. I think the fact that climate is actually represented within the name of the ministry means something. And it is not happening in Zimbabwe alone. In Malawi, I think from last year, they've started having a Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Management. So this is something that is new, that is emerging within our region. And Zimbabwe is responding very well to the demands that we're facing. And then priorities for climate compatible development in Zimbabwe. If we look at what is coming out from research, from policy briefs that are coming out of universities, research, we are finding that there are basically issues of adaptation, there are issues of mitigation, and as far as adaptation issues are concerned, obviously agriculture being the mainstay of the economy, it is one of those very important and vulnerable areas, food security, water resources, energy, health, and I'm glad these sectors are actually represented here. But I think if we check the questions that the minister posed to us, how do we make this workshop not business as usual, business as unusual? How do we translate what we're going to deliberate here into tangible things that can actually support our economy? So as far as agriculture and food security is concerned, issues of early warning systems, Zimbabwe is actually very privileged in this area. I think it's very experienced. It has been a SADC early warning center for some years. And I think we can use that experience to inform our farming processes, our extension, what sort of extension methodologies should we use and practices, and also agricultural education and so forth. And I just wanted also to pick up from the thesis that the minister talked about. Yes, I also happen to be struggling with a thesis around agriculture, and I'm definitely going to reference you there. I'm going to the archives to look for this document. Yes. Around biodiversity, that is also a very important priority. No economy can exist without servicing and looking after its biodiversity. It's not possible. No matter how many diamonds or gold we can find, if we don't look after our biodiversity, and the fact that climate change is actually exacerbating the problems that we're facing with our biodiversity, then we're going to have issues and problems. So even in our social sciences within the universities, languages, how do we integrate these issues so that as we teach, as we research, as we engage with the community, we actually address issues of rangelands, livestock feeding to supplement grazing. It's becoming very critical that grazing, or rather livestock feeding, is supplemented because the grazing is no longer enough, and the browsing is no longer enough. So how do we innovate around issues of supplementary feeding for livestock? Issues of water are so critical. Those who study strategies around war talk about the next world war being around water. I don't know why we need another world war anyway. We don't need it. But I think what they mean is that water is such a critical issue, and because of climate change, the issues around water stress are so serious. So this has implications on irrigation and so forth. Human settlements and tourism. How do we design climate-proof settlements? It's another issue of technological innovation being applied in society. Are we going to always be picking up building plans from our friends? Or are we going to innovate and say, maybe this time around, we need to design houses which are climate proofed. That can save energy, for example. Industry and energy, just a recognition of a UNDP GEF project on using photovoltaic cells to generate electricity. We have so much sun in this country and in this region. So we shouldn't really be struggling about energy generation. But we should also be saying, because of climate change, how can we improve our research so that it can be translated into practice? I remember when a summit for solar energy happened here in Zimbabwe some years ago. But still, we need innovation around making this a reality for the common people. Economic planning, it really needs to link, the national budgeting processes with the realities on the ground, like droughts that we are facing. And just to say that on priorities around mitigation, the second national communication for Zimbabwe this year, it identified energy and urban waste management as the most important areas for mitigation. And around issues of their impact, climate change impact on agriculture, on forestry, and especially, for creating carbon sinks. So those who are in the forestry sector, or those who are so much interested in saying, let's plant trees here and there. If we go back, are we going to still find those trees there? So if we are saying we are planting trees for carbon sinks, the whole cycle from the planting to the maturity of that tree, are we looking after that process? How well do we design such processes? And how can higher education institutions inform the processes of creating carbon sinks? I think that is very, very important. So I just want to end with a question. I've been inspired by the minister. Questions are important to pose. In your view, what are other major priorities? We've discussed a number of priorities for climate compatible development for Zimbabwe. What are other major priorities? If we can just spend about a couple of minutes talking about that, and then we will go to the next stage. Thank you so much for listening.
In other words, from what you've seen there, a brief summary, are there glaring gaps that you see on these people? This is what they call priorities. We have more serious problems in this country. Are those the climate priorities?
I think perhaps this is just a concern, or perhaps a gap. I realize that there is need to map the different risks given the different urban and rural contexts, because climate change risks obviously would have affect urban communities and rural communities in different ways. So perhaps yet again, seeing that in the next 20 or 30 years, you will actually have more people in Africa living in urban areas. There is need to map the risks associated with climate change in urban areas, which are very different from rural areas, and the mitigation or adaptation capacities needed for it.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think she's talking about disaggregation of our focus for climate compatible development. We should be aware of the differences with urban and rural. Yes, at the back.
Yeah, the other sector which I did not see so much is mining, because if you look at mining and climate change, there are really serious challenges there. Like one area where we need to look at, I think, is the river bodies are being affected significantly. We need to look at what is the kind of technologies we need to actually develop which are sensitive to climate change.
Thank you very much for that. And mining and other high-intensive industrial processes, they tend to actually clear up the land and so forth. So that's very significant. Thank you very much for that point. One more, and then we go to the next stage, and maybe we can pick up these other questions later.
Yes. We were also looking at water development. For instance, at one time in Zimbabwe, we had developed a policy whereby we had said we want to build one dam per district every year. And if you look at countries like Egypt or Israel, they don't have a lot of rainfall like we get here, but we don't hear them talking about the hunger and so forth. That's an area where we're not also putting emphasis on. Three-quarters of the water which come in this country, we don't use it. It goes to the ocean.
let's hijack the water before it goes to the ocean. It becomes salt and we will not be able to use it. So I think that's a very important point. Thank you so much for those contributions, and sorry to those who have not been able to share their contributions, but there will be time for that.